Hello everyone, welcome to today's lesson on changing populations. I'm Mrs Jennison and I'm an Associate Director of Science for Outward Grange Academies Trust. Before we start, it would be really helpful if you could turn off your notifications so that you can pay full attention to the lesson. It would be also helpful if you had a pen and a piece of paper ready so that you can take part in the activities throughout this video. You may at some point in these lessons require a calculator. This lesson is a part of our pollution problems topic. Initially, we will start to look at how we deal with a rising population before we see the impact of this rising population in many different circumstances, such as the rainforest destruction, pollution, global warming, biodiversity and food security. Our first outcome is to be able to describe the effects of an increasing population on the planet. And our aspire is to be able to evaluate the impact of a rising population on the planet. But first, I want you to think back to some of our previous topics. What do humans need in order to survive? Humans need food, shelter, water and warmth in order to survive, and we use the Earth's resources to supply us with these things. Since we've evolved, we have needed access to resources. However, during our evolution and our change, we have changed how we use these resources over time. So we eat different food now to what we traditionally would have. Our buildings are built from different materials. We now access water from different resources, and we provide our warmth in different ways. Early humans hunted to obtain the majority of their food, whereas now we farm both crops and livestock for food. However, initially it was still typically food that was native to that region or country, whereas now food is transported all over the world and our diet has a lot more variety than it traditionally would have. Now, shelter. Early shelters utilised material found in that area such as timber, mud and clay, whereas now our houses use resources from all over the world. We use stone, brick, marble, metals, glass, as well as wood still, but now the resources that we use to build our homes are imported from every continent on the planet. Now for water, our technology has improved over time, and that means that humans have now become skillful in obtaining potable water from many sources, whereas traditionally it would have only come from freshwater sources such as rivers and streams and lakes. Now we can obtain potable water, which means safe to drink, from salt water and even wastewater supplies, because our technology and knowledge has improved to the point that we know how to treat that water to make it safe. Now, in terms of warmth, early humans mainly used wood as their fuel source, especially when it came to keeping warm and cooking their food. However, over time, different fuels have been discovered and utilised, such as crude oil, natural gas, and coal. Now, I'd like you to have a go at describing what this graph shows about the world population. Now, the graph shows that the human population increased, and as you can see, initially between 1800 to 1900, it increased quite slowly. You can see that the line on the graph's not as steep. Whereas from 1900, probably from about 1950 onwards, that increase was much more dramatic. And you can see that the line on the graph is much steeper, which shows that it's increasing very quickly over time. Now there's three images on the screen at the moment, and what I'd like you to think about is how would the rising population link to these three images? So what impact is that going to have on these images? So let's look at an image at a time. The first image is there to represent farming. Now, it's not the only type of farming. We know that we farm crops and animals for our food sources. A larger population will mean that more food is required. Now, that means that more land will be needed to supply that food. So there's a good chance that natural wildlife and forests and rainforests will be cut down in order to supply the land that we need to grow food. Now, the second image indicated housing. Now, as the population increases, that means that we will need more housing because more people will need more shelter. Now, again, that will increase the amount of land we need for housing, and you might even notice around where you live, there are large housing developments being built to support people in accessing housing, to increase the number of properties in the UK in particular, due to the rising population. The final image was representing landfill. Now, landfill is typically where your household waste will end up, and a larger population will mean that more rubbish or waste is being created. And currently some of that goes into landfill. We do recycle some of our waste, but we are still digging holes in the ground and putting our waste into it. Now, that means if we have larger amounts of waste, again, we are going to need to increase the amount of land that we have for landfill.
the Australian Academy of Science. Follow our Facebook page.
So, following that quick video, we're going to do a little quiz. It's a true or false quiz. So we're going to work through this together. So, first one, true or false, the population has increased quickly over the last 200 years. And the answer is true. True or false, humans don't transport many resources around the world. And the answer is false. We transport resources all over the world. True or false, humans were hunter-gatherers before becoming farmers. And the answer is true. True or false, an increased population will need more food to sustain it. And the answer is true. True or false, we don't need to use any more land for our resources. And the answer is false. True or false, families are now having less children than they did in the 1950s. And the answer is true. And some scientists think that that means the population will eventually level out. So now it's time for you to have a go at a longer style question on this topic. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to bug that question. So we're going to box a command word first, and you're being asked to explain. That means giving the reasons why something happens. And in your answer, you should use the connective because. Now you're being asked to explain the impact of population increase on the Earth and its resources. And I'm going to give you some time to answer that question. So I'm going to break the model answer down into sections. The first part is just the statements, and then I'm going to put the linking explanations in there as well. So the first statement would be regarding food, and a higher population will need more food. Now that means we're going to have increased farming, and that will need increased land. But a few linking statements there in blue that will impact on other sources of food such as oceans. And there's also increased production of pollutants released into the atmosphere from that process of farming. And we will look at that in a little bit more detail later on in this topic. The next part would be referring to shelter, and a higher population is going to need more housing, which means there'll be an increased use of land again because we need to build houses. However, that also will link to a loss of habitats for animals that lived on that land initially. There's also other things to take into account here, such as the resources we would be using to build that housing, and that would also be a linking statement. The next thing to consider is the waste production involved in us having a higher population, which means more waste will be produced and there will be more pollutants produced. Now that means there's going to be increased use of land for landfill because you've got more waste being produced, but also a linking statement of more pollutants being released into the atmosphere through our use of landfill. So that's everything from me in this lesson, and I will see you soon.